Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL Winter Split Semifinals overview and analysis video. I'm so excited to get into this series. Obviously, this is your lower bracket finals, your semifinals, whatever you want to call it here in the Winter Split. The winner of today's series will go on to face anyone's legend in the grand finals of the LPL to see who's going to represent the region at the First Stand tournament here in 2025. I'm super excited. I think this is a very fun matchup on paper. Definitely two teams with different styles that want to go head to head. I'm interested to see which one's going to come out on top because I think both of them have a real argument to be made that they are, some of the best teams in the world right now with how they have played, but in very different ways. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below. But there are some things I do want to talk about before the actual content here today. Usually don't like to do too much in these intros, but a couple of things I need to shout out first and foremost if you are watching this as it goes up or the day after it ends up going up, so that's either Friday night or Saturday morning. Tomorrow, March the 1st, that's obviously Saturday afternoon, I will be live both here on YouTube and on Twitch as the official co-streamer for Citadel Gaming in the NACL OQs. The NACL OQs do start up tomorrow. Round 1 and Round 2, at least in the upper bracket, are tomorrow, and we will be live starting from 4 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. PST if you're on Pacific time, until the final games of that day, which is going to be hopefully sometime around, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully it's much later into the night. That means Citadel is doing well. If you're interested in that, I'd love to see you in chat. I'd love to see you join here on YouTube or on Twitch. The link to that, the Twitch that is going to be down in the description if you are interested in following there. But again, I'll be live on this channel. I'll put a post out. I'll tweet it out as well if you follow me on Twitter when that goes live. So if you're interested in that, definitely come and tune in. It's going to be a real fun time. I'll be streaming Citadel's games for the entirety of the NACL OQs. And so, come hit a follow, come watch along, and it's going to be a good time. But another big kind of congratulations announcement I want to give is actually kind of an unsung hero of this channel for a very long time, my editor Oatmeal. You probably see him in the comment section all the time. He's really helped out with a lot of the improvements on the graphics on this channel over the past couple of years. He's really the only reason that I'm able to get these videos out as consistently as I do, because he does give a ton of help with a lot of the graphics, and you might have recognized some of the styles that you have seen on this channel on the official LPL broadcast as of late, specifically a lot of the intro packages and player timelines and things like that, those fun little graphics that are popping up all over the LPL. That is Oatmeal. So everybody say congratulations to him down in the comment section below. It's crazy to see somebody that I've worked with for so long, actually get on the LPL broadcast, and they've been phenomenal. The graphics have been excellent. If you've noticed an uptick in quality in the LPL graphics, that's definitely because of him. So big shout out to him. He's done a fantastic job here for so long. He has more than earned the opportunity to do the official LPL broadcast, and I will be on the NACL OQ co-streaming broadcast. So again, if you're interested in any of that stuff, links are in the description. But that's all the intro stuff out of the way. I usually don't like to do too long of an early intro, but there was just a lot to cover in today's video, and so we had to get it a little bit out of the way. We are going to be getting into the actual content now, though I don't want to waste too much of your time at the beginning. Let's jump into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game here in the semifinals, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and at the end of the series, I will be giving a player of the series to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. The only thing left to preview at the end of these games is, of course, the finals. It's the grand finals between anyone's legend and whoever walks out of this series here today. We're going to do an in-depth preview of where exactly I think that series might go, where I think the matchups are kind of pointing, and, what my prediction generally is at the end, who I think will be walking out as the LPL champion in the Winter Split. But that's for the end of the video. Most of today will be spent talking about the semifinals, so let's get into it. I've done enough yapping at the start of this video. Let's get into the analysis. It's, of course, a matchup between the number 1 seed from Group B in JD Gaming coming down from winner's bracket, and the number 2 seed from Group A in Top Esports. They're coming from slightly different positions, I would say. Obviously, Top Esports has looked excellent, but JDG had been undefeated in these best of fives up until their loss to AL. It was a very close, very back and forth 5-game series with anyone's legend, and they just couldn't quite get across the finish line. And I think the thing that I was worried most about when it came to JDG kind of became true, I would say, a bit for them in that series, where they're just kind of a two-man machine. Scout and Paze are obviously very good players, and they have so much to offer JDG, but if Scout's not having a particularly great series, and if the enemy team puts a lot of resources into making sure that Paze can't take over these games, it just sometimes feels like nobody else on this team is going to be able to step up and dominate in that same kind of way. We saw players like Ale just not have a very good series on the top side. Flandre was way better than him. Shun had some good moments, but also had some really inconsistent moments. Things like the Kindred looked very good, but if he wasn't able to establish that pressure early, we saw a lot of that end up falling off. Missing has generally just dropped a lot in terms of quality over the past couple of years. I was already critiquing him pretty heavily in 2024, and I think a lot of those flaws are very much still here in 2025. That being said, there was a reason that team had not lost a best of 5 up until that point. Even though they were in a relatively tough group, they had to play Weibo Gaming in a best of 5. They are a good team. Like, this JDG is not some pushover that got there by luck or just by an easy path. This is still a team that has absolutely had to conquer some teams to get here, and that's because they have two of the best players in the world. I think you could make an argument that they have two of the top 10 players in the world on this team in Scout and Paze. Paze in particular has been absolutely phenomenal, and while Scout has been a little bit more up and down, I would say overall, for JDG, like, I think it's just because of the amount of pressure that is on him individually when it comes to this team's success. I think when he ends up failing, it's a lot more noticeable because JDG just relies so much on him being able to win in order for them to be relevant in a lot of these games, but for the most part, he has been spectacular across this entire split. He certainly was in the group stage, and Paze has been even better. Truly one of the best players in the LPL and one of the best performers in the world so far this year, which has been a really great sign outside of the Gen G system. But Top Esports is very much coming I guess I would say into this series with more momentum. That's certainly the way I would put it. They've looked phenomenal throughout the entirety of the playoffs. They have only lost 2 best of series at all across this entire year, and both of them were to Anyone's Legend, one in the finals of Demacia Cup in the preseason, and then one in the group stage to Anyone's Legend, who they were unlucky enough to draw in that group stage tournament. Top Esports is clearly one of the best teams in the world, and, you know, depending on how the series goes, we might have to start talking about Group A just being the group of death. It was very funny. You know, we had 2 of the best teams in the LPL and maybe the 2 worst teams in the LPL all in one group. Very funny how that ended up working out, but Top Esports has looked phenomenal, and I think their win over Billy kind of solidifies that this team is one of the best in the LPL and one of the best in the world. It feels like everything is clicking for them right now. As much as I've hyped up players like Scout on the other side, like Cream has been the best mid laner in the LPL, and I don't even really think it's been particularly close if you count playoff form, right? Like players like Doenby were very good in the group stage, but Cream has just been on a completely different level so far in these best of 5s in the playoffs. He has absolutely dominated basically every series that Top Esports has gotten into. He is really emerging as a star player. He already made a really big leap, in my opinion, last year coming over to Top Esports and really solidifying himself as like a top 3 mid laner in the league. I think there's a chance that we could be walking out of the winter split if Top Esports has a really good playoff run, talking about Cream as like a top 5 mid laner in the world. Like that's where he's starting to get in terms of his takeover performances. He's linked up with Kanavi really well. I think those two work incredibly well as a mid jungle duo. Kanavi is obviously one of the best early pathers in the world, and Cream is so good at receiving resources that those two end up just playing off of each other very consistently, and I think you could say the same thing about 369 and Kanavi on the top side. I was getting a bit concerned about 369 at the end of 2024 because he just wasn't playing up to his own standard. He was so good in the spring split, and he couldn't quite match that in summer, and I was a bit frustrated by that, but, you know, bring 369 and Kanavi and Home, their coach, back together again, and all of a sudden things do start to work out. He was incredible in that series against Billy Gaming. Honestly, just completely gapped Bin on the other side of that, which I was not expecting. A fantastic series from 369. Jackie Love and Crisp, while they've been inconsistent, I think have been solid. I've seen a lot of people talking about Jackie Love as if he's having this tremendously unbelievable breakout split. I think he's been having splits like this the last couple of years, and people just have not been paying attention. Again, I give him my Summer Split MVP in 2023 when they missed Worlds. That's how valuable I thought he was to that Top Esports team, and I thought he was just as good last year. I actually think he's playing a little below his own individual level in terms of the things I'm seeing on tape so far in 2025, but below his individual level is still unbelievable, right? He's still a top 20 player in the world, even when things aren't going perfectly for him, and on any given day, he can pop off and be the better AD carry. If he is going to be that in this series, it's going to be very difficult for JDG to win, and as long as Crisp is not inting, he's making incredible plays. Again, his good plays are still some of the best in the world. He's just very inconsistent in that regard, and so Top Esports definitely coming in with a lot of momentum, but at the end of the day, if Scout and Paze are the 2 best players on the Rift, which is super possible control in this series, then they're gonna win. Like, Paze is gonna be able to dominate these games. He's gonna be able to get super far ahead, and Scout's gonna be super consistent in team fights. And so it's really gonna be up, in my opinion, to who has the best player on the Rift. If that's gonna be Cream or Kanavi or Jackie Love or 369, then Top Esports is gonna be in a great spot. But if Scout and Paze can really separate themselves, then that's gonna be a bit of a problem that I don't think they have a very clean answer to because of how aggressive and control-oriented their style ends up being. So I think it's a fun series. I think it's a fun matchup. I predicted Top Esports 3-1 in my previous video. We'll see if that ends up coming to fruition, but the only way to know is, of course, to go game by game, and that means starting with game number 1. So let's get into it. The winner of game number 1 was JD Gaming. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up 1-0 in this series, coming down from winner's bracket. Getting that blue side, like, side selection advantage in this series might actually turn out to be very influential on things for JDG, because this was a fantastic draft in game number 1. Now, I don't think you have perfect avenues in every area. I think that there is a universe where Top Esports just gets full control of this game by 10 or 15 minutes, wins every single fight around Otacon, around Void Grubs, and just kind of scales the game out of control, gets to the point where they have too big of a gold lead for you to be able to react to. But the problem with Top Esports' draft in general is that they have no late game. Like, they have no way to win fights if this game goes beyond 30-ish minutes into the game. They're just not going to be nearly as strong as JDG on the other side. And JDG have a great team fighting comp. They have a ton of things set up for them to be able to dominate in the back half of games. The problem for JDG is they don't really have any agency outside of the Xin Zhao in the early game. They're hoping and praying that this jungle matchup does not get out of control, and lucky for them, Shun was exceptionally good here in game number 1. He's going to have to be, I think, for this series to make it work. And, you know, we talk about how Scout and Paze are important. That just makes everybody else on this team even more important. If they're going to be two of the best players in the world, you have to be good enough to be able to keep up with them. And that's what Shun was here. There was a very big jungle gap, and it was in favor of Shun and the Xin Zhao. He is, of course, player of the game in game number 1. He is just so essential towards setting the pace and setting the tempo for this, because if Top Esports don't win early, if they don't have that prio in the mid game, if Shun is able to control the map in that kind of way, there's actually no way for Top Esports to win this game. I actually think it is impossible. You can never win a 5v5, and you can't even really outpush or outsiege JDG at any point. Like, there's just no way back into this if you're Top Esports and you don't have control of the map. And so for Shun to come out and look as good as he did, it was really impressive and really important stuff. But I don't want to make this like a solo carry party. There were a lot of good things going on here. I think Missing actually had a really good game on the Renata. He was very active on the map. I think those ultimates ended up being very pivotal, especially in those mid-game fights when you're looking specifically at, you know, like a lot of the Baron or Otacon exchanges, like these clumped up exchanges. That's where Renata can really thrive. Ale was really good on the Rumble. That champion continues to just completely overperform my expectations. I'm not a Rumble on B1 kind of guy. It just feels like a very exploitable pick, but nobody in the world has been able to exploit it. And even the matchups that are supposed to be beating it, they're just not beating it. I don't think Mbessa is that, but we've consistently seen, you know, like Jace lose to Rumble, and that's just not supposed to happen. You know what I mean? Rumble just looks a lot stronger than a lot of people are considering right now. It's definitely, you know, worth the B1 at the current moment in terms of how things are going. I thought Scout and Paze were fine, but it's really nice to be in a situation where JDG can beat a great team like Top Esports, and I talk about Scout and Paze last. That's a crazy situation to end up being in, but that's exactly what happened. I think JDG ended up playing this one perfectly. They knew they outscaled. They knew they got to the late game, and if they were going to go into a lot of these fights with the gold lead, it was basically over because they already had such an inherent advantage in the 5v5s. But for Top Esports on the other side, you drafted a pretty risky comp, and it just didn't end up working out. Ironically enough, this is basically exactly what JD Gaming was doing in their series against Anyone's Legend, where they were just picking a lot of these early game comps, hoping and praying that they could win early, get a gold lead, and just end the game before things got out of control, and it just didn't work out. It didn't work for JDG in that series. It took them getting on blue side and, you know, controlling the draft a bit more, getting things that were a bit more ubiquitous towards the entire game rather than just really good in the early and in the mid game to really unlock them and keep them alive in that series against AL. For Top Esports, unfortunately, it just felt like they fell into a very similar trap here in game number 1. Kanavi is a very easy choice for dud of the game. Really not a good game number 1 for Kanavi. He's going to have to be better than this. Shun is a very exploitable member of JDG, and quite frankly, he was the only player you had to worry about at all in the early game, and yet Kanavi just didn't have any prio, didn't have any pressure, was getting caught out in bad situations. Just not a particularly good game from him. I think it's important to note that Cream was also useless on this Ahri, and this draft really centers around Vi Ahri, right? Like, this entire draft is centered around the idea that you can get picks in the middle of this game and start to snowball things out of control. If Cream is not going to be effective in that role, that is a major problem. He's very good at Ahri, but I think the rest of JDG JDG did a great job of neutralizing the effectiveness of that champion. I don't like Crisp on Karma. I don't like Crisp on Enchanters. I'm a big Enchanter guy. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. I think people very much underplay Enchanters in the current meta, but Crisp is not that guy. He's not the guy you want to see on an Enchanter. His entire playstyle, his entire mentality is built for Engagers and Engagers exclusively. Just not the direction I personally would have gone in. 369, JackeyLove, they were whatever. Overall, it was the middle of the map that I think ended up losing this for top esports. Kanavi and Cream just didn't have enough relevance, and they've kind of been the strength for this team. And so if they don't bounce back, if you're going to get a great performance out of Shun, if you're going to get a good enough performance out of Scout to be able to be better and more useful than Cream on the other side, that's kind of GG's for top esports. You have to have those two players stepping up. They're way too integral. And for JD Gaming, again, you just have to be able to keep the form going. What we've seen throughout the LPL playoffs in particular is that a lot of the teams that have outs in the late game, a lot of these teams that are a little bit more inevitable, they're actually doing a lot better and they're being a lot more consistent. We'll see if that trend ends up carrying over to the rest of the series or if teams end up moving in a different direction, but the only way to know is to go to game 2. You can't lose this if you're top esports. Going down 0-2 to JD Gaming would be a nightmare, and getting that 2-0 lead if you are JD Gaming is absolutely ginormous. So big game for both of these teams. Who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 2. They are going to tie up this series at 1 apiece, and we are all knotted up. And this was kind of a dominant game. Obviously, you kind of knew that was going to happen coming out of draft. I'm not saying one way or the other, but you kind of knew pretty strongly that one of these teams was just going to decimate the other. This is not a draft between two teams where, one can control the early game, one has an out. It's not like game 1 where, Top Esports played for early, they didn't win early, and then JDG had their out. This is literally like, we both want to play for early game. One of us is going to get a lead. One of us has an easier time winning early anyways, just naturally from this draft. And, neither of us really want to try and play this out into the later part of the game. In fact, Top Esports' job was much easier. Nidalee has so much more prio early than Lilia. In this particular matchup, you drafted a bunch of lanes that are just overall really positive for you. Gnar into Renekton is like notoriously very good for Gnar. I think Yone into Corki, like Corki mid, I'm just so over. Like, I get that a lot of these older school players like Scout that love to team fight, like they love to take Corki into the mid lane, but it's just not working. And obviously MF and Nico have a ton of lane prio. They're one of the few lanes that I think actually can just completely bully out the Kalista. And so you're looking at a lot of these situations and you're saying, well, both teams kind of just want to win the game early, like JDG obviously do. They're playing Renekton Kalista. They clearly want to try and get ahead of things, but Top Esports just have a better draft for that. They end up dominating the game. It's never really close. JDG have no avenue to get back in it, and it's over at 26 minutes. Like, yeah, that's how it ends up going. 369 is going to get player of the game for me on the top side. The Gnar was very influential. This is a great Gnar game. Like, in terms of draft, like, this is a great game to play Gnar. You have so many different opportunities to be able to get really strong, and honestly, there's no real answer to Gnar in these team fights of anybody on JD Gaming. Like, you're hoping and praying that Lilia ends up getting strong enough to be able to deal with him later on, but Renekton can't deal with Gnar. Like, notoriously, Renekton can't deal with Gnar. It's one of the champions that really takes him out. It's why I really hate blind pick Renekton right now. It's not a great draft, in my opinion, for JD Gaming, and it's hard for me to say that because I got Kalista Lilia, which I think is pretty strong, but Renekton Corki just really sour me on this, and I think the Gnar definitely kind of punished that on the top side. 369 in general, it's just been in great form. I think getting back with Kanavi, getting back with Home, I think both of those things have really helped him and, have really started to get him back out of his shell. He's always been better at the beginning of the year. He certainly was last year, so hopefully he can keep the pace up. It's not necessarily been the most consistent thing in the world for him, but I believe he can do it. I also do think that JackeyLove looked fantastic in this one on the Misfortune. Typically speaking, this champion looks pretty bad in pro. I think over the course of 2025, we've not exactly seen the best of MF. Generally, she needs to be very effective in these mid-game skirmishes. Again, things like Otacon just need to be absolutely massive to make the most of Misfortune, and oftentimes the Wombo is just not as easy to execute as maybe you would want. The ultimate ends up being effective, but not quite like dominant, and she doesn't do a ton else in the late game, and so when you go up against a lot of these other AD carries that are a little bit more focused on being useful later on, that have been really popular, things like, Kai'Sa and Zeri, you're not going to get that same kind of effectiveness, generally speaking, from MF, and I think that's why her win rate's been low. But as a counter to Kalista, like, specifically, just say, like, screw it, Kalista's not going to beat us this game. I think it ended up working really well, and JackeyLove was very effective with those ultimates. Cream and Kanavi, I think, played great. Kanavi, honestly, is going to go underrated for how good this game was on the Nidalee. He's very good at that champion. He always has been. Cream was very good on the Yone, had way more prio and pressure than the Corki, but how much of that is the champion? And then Crisp was good on the Nico, ends up going deathless. A couple of good engages, but for the most part was the least relevant relevant player on the team. But great game overall from Top Esports, not a particularly close one, and that applies to JDG as well. Not really a lot of analysis to do. They picked a comp that does need to win early. Again, like Renekton, Lilia, Kalista, the early part of this draft, you are signaling that you want to try to control the pace of this game. This reminds me so much of their drafts against anyone's legend, and yet the enemy team just does that better. You have basically 3 losing lanes and no scaling. Like, you have Corki and Lilia to potentially be an out for you in the late game as like a team fighting duo, but like good luck getting there because Kalista's never going to get online, Renekton is never going to get online in this game, and you're just never going to have prio. Like, I just think you got completely outdrafted, and that kind of showed in the result here, the 26-minute win. Like, once you lost in the early game, once you weren't able to get any gold on the players you needed to get gold on, it's over. It's doomed. It's like actually unwinnable. Dead of the game could go to basically anybody. I'm giving it to Missing because he was awful in this game on the Alistar, but if you wanted to give it to Scout for the Corki, I think that's pretty fair. I think, honestly, kind of biased, I kind of want to give it to Scout just because I hate Corki mid, and I think it's really not working at the pro level right now, and I think we saw that here. Shun was completely out-jungled by Kanavi in the early game, and that completely destroyed any chance that JDG ever had of winning this game. Pays was completely ineffective. Ala did his best to do something here, even though he was in a matchup where he wasn't particularly favored. Overall, it just was a bad draft and a bad game from JDG, but you gotta shake it off. You gotta be able to, you know, say, screw it, it's just game 2, who cares? The series is tied up at 1 apiece. We're going into a best of 3 now, and as you guys know, when things are tied up 1-1, I think game 3 is the most important game in the series to be able to establish prio and establish pressure. Winning 1 game of the last 2 is so much easier than having to win both, and I think game 3 really kind of indicates that, especially because of how strong blue side is. It gives you side control for the rest of the series if it goes to 5 games, and so big game number 3 here. Who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to go up in the first time for this series, 2-1, and they're going to put a lot of pressure on JD Gaming by picking up game 3 on red side. This is obviously a pretty gigantic victory, and once again, I do think that draft is a little bit involved, but at the end of the day, Top Esports is just playing better than JD Gaming is right now. An important piece of what we talked about for JDG is that Scout and Pays kind of have to be some of the best players in the world in order for this team to operate in the way that they're supposed to, and quite frankly, they've just not been that so far in this series. Even in the game that they won, again, we talked about them last, and I was like, oh, that's a good thing, you know, Shun and Ale really carrying a lot of the load on the top side in terms of damage, Missing having a really good game as a setup man. Like, that's a really good thing. They don't need Scout and Pace to win, but like when it comes down to these games, you know you're not going to get a perfect result out of those 3 every single game in and game out. If Scout's going to have a bad series, which he's kind of having, if Pace is just going to get outclassed and kind of play a little bit poor here, it's going to be a bit of a problem for JD Gaming, and that's kind of the situation they've run into after the first 3 games here. So we can go ahead and talk about it, starting, of course, with Top Esports. Player of the game for me has got to go to Kanavi. When you're looking at these 2 drafts, I think they're actually, like, perfectly inverted from each other. Both of them have really good tools to both be able to, like, poke and siege and, you know, do all those things. Obviously, JDG has, like, Jace Ziggs early on in draft that very much points to that. But also, both of them have good tools to be able to play kind of an early control style game. I think for JDG, it looks a little bit different because theoretically you want to be able to get that early lane prio out of like role swap or lane swapping Ziggs and, you know, moving Jace around to wherever you need, getting a lot of turrets early on in games. Like, that's what you want to do with this comp. And for Top Esports, it's just fighting over every neutral objective. That is clearly the idea behind this draft. It's let's spike in the mid game. Let's just absolutely blow up in the mid game. Who cares what our late game looks like? Who cares if we're ever going to be able to team fight around Mel in the late game? Because Mel's not been particularly successful as a primary carry in the late game. We are going to play entirely for trying to win a lot of these skirmishes, and it absolutely ended up going in their favor. And you know what? They have a lot of tools to be able to poke and to be able to control neutral objectives as well. And so you sit in this situation where obviously Lee Sin just has a ton of free roam in the early game, which does kind of shut down the idea of let's move Jason Ziggs wherever we need to in order to take every tower. Because if Lee Sin's going to be a problem, if you can move Lee Sin basically anywhere, have a 3v3 and feel like you can win that, which kind of is the case for Top Esports at any point in this early game, then that is not really solvable for JD Gaming, and that ended up being the case once again, is you just draft 3 lanes that individually don't have a ton of pressure into the enemy in particular, and you end up really struggling in that regard. Kanavi obviously ended up really popping off on the Lee Sin. I think you could very realistically give this player of the game, though, to a couple of people The Lee Sin to me was the most relevant, not only because of the score, like 13 kills is absolutely ridiculous, an unbelievable game from him on the Lee Sin here, but like 369 was excellent on the Gragas, and Ale has just not been able to keep up with him throughout this series. It's actually ridiculously similar to what happened to Bin in the previous series where 369 just looked like the better player. He is in great form right now. I think Crisp was exceptionally good in this game on the Braum, just moving around the map and using a lot of his early combat strength to their advantage. Again, Ziggs, Leona, it's not particularly punishable, but if you're going to move Ashe and Braum into other places, specifically Braum and Lee Sin, that's a very dangerous duo to end up running into in the mid game, and obviously, you have plenty of ways to get picks and to get catch-outs, like Jackie Love really helps with that, and we finally see Mel win a game in any major region. I believe this is her first win in a major region ever. Like, and obviously that's a crazy stat. I think she was like 0-13 or something going into this. It was actually somewhere around there. We've covered every single one of them on this channel, and I've constantly been like, yep, Mel topping the damage charts and losing the game. It's a very consistent formula. Very funny that the one game that she finally does end up winning, she's picked on R5, and she's the least relevant member of her team. She's not really the one that ends up dragging them across the finish line. I think what we're learning about Mel is that she's just not a primary carry option in pro play. There are too many things that need to go right in order for Mel to be able to win a lot of 5v5s in the back half of games, but as somebody that can really control area, like specifically around objectives, you know, if you're going to play for Void Grubs or Dragons or Otacon or whatever you want to go for in this game, Baron, then yeah, having Lee Sin and Ashe plus Mel, all of a sudden that really increases her value in my opinion. So just really good stuff from Top Esports. Again, I think they ended up winning in draft, and I don't think it was quite as bad as maybe it was in game number 2, but definitely still a pretty big victory. And then for JDG, things are just kind of collapsing at the current moment. Scout and Pays have to be better. I know that I just said that draft was a big factor in this, but this is a winnable game if you are able to get Jace and Ziggs into good positions. I hate putting Pays on Ziggs. We talked about this in the series against AL. Look at every single game that Pays has done well on so far in 2024. Hell, go back, or 2025. Go back to 2024. Go back to 2023. Pays is a hyper carry player. That's what he does. He plays Zeri, he plays Kai'Sa, he plays these champions that want to dominate in the late game. He plays Jinx. That's what he does. He wants to be able to fight 5v5 in the back half of these games and be a primary option, and you're putting him on Ziggs. You're drafting a comp that is very much like in the early game, we're going to hope to take towers, and our late game out is hope and pray that Jax can split push into a victory. And I get that that's probably more consistent than anything Top Esports has on the other side, but you cannot win skirmishes with this comp. There is no way for you to win a 3v3 anywhere on the map with any configuration of these 5 champions, especially once Lee Sin ended up getting really far ahead. And so I think JDG just keeps putting themselves in bad positions, and I think part of that is their gameplay. Dud of the game, like I said, the player of the game could go to anybody on Top Esports. All of them, basically, with the exception of Cream, played a really influential role in why this game ended up going well. Like, Ale was bad, Scout was bad, Pays was bad, Missing was bad. Really, the only player I'm not going to give it to is Shun, because it really wasn't his fault. He was hoping and praying that his team could survive and that he could actually facilitate them in the mid game, but it just didn't end up happening. Ale gets completely outplayed by 369 on the top side. Missing is just a non-factor on the Leona. Pays is non-existent on the Ziggs, again, a champion he's never been that good at. And Scout's gonna get it for me because I'm just getting frustrated, not only with him first picking a lot of these champions that have kind of proven to not be successful in pro so far this year. Corki has not looked good in the mid lane. It's only really looked good in the bot lane. Jace has a ridiculously low win rate. I get that people still think that he's strong. I think that he's strong, but it's clearly not working. There are clearly a lot of ways to take away the advantages of Jace, especially in the mid lane right now, and Scout just keeps opting into these matchups, and I'm just frustrated by it. Again, this is kind of a personal, like, he's just got to figure it out. He's too important to this team to have a series like this because he's just not playing well enough, and if JDG's not going to get that kind of performance out of their 2 carries, it's over. It's doomed. It's not going to be winnable, but it's still alive. Like, game number 4 is still winnable, and if you win game 4, it's do or die in game number 5. It's a good place to be. You're not done or dusted just yet, but obviously you have to win game 4, and I'm sure Top Esports wants to close this out in 4 games. They don't want to go to 5 games with JD Gaming. They don't want to leave this up to a potential Pays masterclass or a Scout masterclass in game number 5. They want to be able to close this out. Are they going to be able to do it? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 4. They're going to take this series 3-1, and they will officially qualify to take on their group rivals, their Kryptonite, over the course of 2025 so far in anyone's legend. That means JD Gaming is unfortunately done for the year in 3rd place, or for the split, I should say, in 3rd place. They're obviously not done for the year just yet, but not the result I think they were looking for. I think they came into the series feeling pretty okay about their chances overall. They did not show up here today. I don't really know what else to say. They were completely outclassed by Top Esports. Their Game 1 win looked okay, but for the most part, it was Shun looking pretty good, and, everybody else just not really looking good, even in a lot of the losses. I'm not blaming Shun. He was the best player on JD Gaming in this series. It was basically everybody else that just didn't really play particularly well on the day, but it's not important. JD Gaming's the team that's out. Let's talk about Top Esports. Let's talk about what they did well. I think talking about this Game 4 draft first and foremost, this is the clearest example to me of what went wrong for JDG in that series against AL in particular, where they just had a lot of trouble being able to control the pace of the game, regardless of whether or not they should or they shouldn't. This is inherently a game where they are going to get outscaled, and I love the draft, by the way, for Top Esports, because I love just, the raw call, the read that Top Esports has, which is saying, okay, we're going to pick Jinx on R1. We're going to pick Jinx Lulu. We're going to play around this AD carry role. We're going to let Jackie Love, be this hyper carry. We know we can do that. But more than that, we're going to take that option away from Pays and from JD Gaming. We're going to basically force them into something that is punishing early. We're going to force him to pick something that can win in the bot lane to stop Jinx from getting out of control. You can't really pick something like Zeri anymore if Jinx Lulu is on the other side of the matchup. You're just not going to be in a great spot. So it takes Pays off of some of his better champions that would have been available in this matchup. So I really like that draft decision from Top Esports. Again, it just shows the good scouting that I think this team did going into a series like this, but obviously, it's Jackie Love who's player of the game. This entire comp is built around Jinx. Any draft where you draft Jinx, Lulu, Poppy, first 3 picks, yeah, that draft is around Jinx. Yes, you supplement it with Viego and Aurora, who are a bit more main character-y on their own, but this is still going to be a game where if Jinx gets online, it becomes basically impossible to deal with her, and that's exactly what happened. Jackie Love was phenomenal, and he's going to get player of the game for Game 4. This is probably his best game of the playoffs, although I think it's up there with some of the later games against Billy Gaming, which were also really good, but he's not player of the series. Player of the series, pretty obviously to me, is going to go to 369 on the top side. We're going to talk about Ale on the other side of this, but boy, was he mega outplayed in this series. 369 looked like an absolute menace on the top side of the map. He was excellent throughout this entire series. Game 2 and Game 3 were both, I don't want to say won entirely through him, but he just was so sensational in the middle of this series, and he was awesome on the Poppy here in Game number 4 as well. Having the Poppy just opens up so many more options for this team, just in general, and again, his ability to just win lane and be more useful in situations where he shouldn't necessarily be as useful as he is, it's just so paramount towards the success of Top Esports. He was awesome here. Kanavi had a very good series. I think Crisp had a really good series. He played a lot more enchanters in this series than he normally does. Typically, I'm pretty against that, but again, I like the idea of just saying, we're taking Jinx Lulu, you have to pick Draven or something that can punish this early, and that's going to take Pays out of his comfort zone. If that's what Crisp needed to do in order to win, that's totally fine. He didn't run it at all. In fact, it was very useful on the Lulu, and I would argue that Cream had his best game of the entire series here in Game number 4. He wasn't the main character like he had been the past couple series for Top Esports, but he still looked very good for this team and still was very relevant. He was better than Scout on the other side of this. And now look at all the mid laners that Cream has had to beat in order to go further along into this tournament. It's basically a who's who of stars of the LPL's past. He had to beat Rookie in round 1. He had to beat Doanby in round 2. He had to beat Knight in round 3. He had to beat Scout in round 4. It's basically a who's who of the best mid laners in LPL history. And Cream has been able to conquer them all on this run. It's been really great stuff from him. That is a big narrative defining moment, but overall, just a great series from Top Esports. I wish I could go more in depth on this game, but honestly, it was pretty straightforward. All things considered, this series was pretty straightforward. Games 2, 3, and 4 really weren't all that back and forth. Top Esports was definitely the better of these two teams, and it kind of came down to 2 roles in particular that I'm definitely going to point out. It was 3 roles, if we're really talking about it, that really underperformed for JD Gaming, but top and support were just awful in this series, and I think that really made it unwinnable for JDG. Missing had a horrible series. He's getting done of the game here for Game number 4. This Nautilus performance was just awful, and Missing is, I don't want to say falling off of a cliff, but the decline is real. It's not made up. What we saw last year where things just kind of got worse even though he was still playing with Ruler, that was not fictitious. That was not, wrong to point out. It has clearly gotten even worse going into 2025. He is not even playing an average support right now. He is a below average support for JD Gaming, and it's really held them back. And honestly, it helps encapsulate and kind of, show off that Pays has really been that damn good for JDG JDG this year because he's made that bot lane look very dangerous and very problematic for other teams to have to deal with, and Missing is not even playing well. It's literally like a one-man bot lane, and it's still one of the better ones in the league. That's how good Paze has been, even if he wasn't in this series, but Missing is like truly an issue for JDG right now that they have to figure out. Ale was awful in their two most important series of the playoffs. He got absolutely destroyed by Flandre. He got absolutely destroyed by 369, and I get it that both of those top laners are very good, but Ollie's supposed to be a top 2, top 3 guy. Like, you brought him in because he's supposed to be better, or at least, at the very least, like, as good as a lot of these other options. These are former JDG top laners that he went up against. Flandre was on the team last year, 369 was on the team 2 years ago, and Ollie got completely outplayed by both of them, and he was kind of useless throughout this entire series. That's not good enough. He's going to have to get better going into the rest of the year. Paze obviously wasn't able to step up and carry, but I don't think he was the problem either. Just more so that he wasn't the solution like he normally is. And Scout actually did have a bad series. Like, there is nothing else to say. This was a time where Scout really needed to step up and be important for JDG, and he just wasn't. I'm not blaming this series at all on Shun. He was easily the best player on JD Gaming throughout all 4 of these games, but what are you gonna do? You know what I mean? Like, as a jungler, if your team's losing every single lane, there's only so much you can do in a lot of these games. And so for JDG, they do have some things they need to fix, but I think they are fixable. Again, if you just get normal human performances out of Ale and Missing, I think that there is an avenue for you to be able to win series like this. You have 3 of your 5 members of the team not playing well, really, at all at any given time, and this team still got top 3 in the LPL. If everything starts clicking for them, they can win the entire league. It just hasn't clicked like that. It hasn't connected like that so far in 2025. Hopefully they can get things together, but congratulations again to Top Esports. They're moving on to the finals to get another matchup against AL. Maybe this is the final time that they will get the chance to overcome them, but at the very least they have proven that Group A was the group of death. That is very much confirmed at this point, and this is a team that very much can contend to win the LPL. But with that series concluding, with our semifinals wrapping up, let's go ahead and preview our LPL Winter Split Finals. We've been doing this for the finals in all of the other regions. Perhaps we push this out to more series as we go along throughout the year, but for now, I think the finals make sense. It's going to be a big preview. Let's go ahead and get into the specifics of the matchup here between Anyone's Legend and Top Esports that's coming in the finals. Obviously, we've seen these two teams face off in 2 different best-of series over the course of this year. Again, in the finals of Demacia Cup and then in the regular season because they were both in Group A. AL ended up winning both of those series, but both of those series were very close. It's not like Top Esports was super out of it in either of them. AL did manage to squeak across a victory in both, but it was close. Like, again, like you don't want to count out Top Esports in a matchup like this. I think when you look lane by lane, there are reasons to believe that Top Esports can have a real shot here. And I think, to me, one of the big matchups that's going to go undervalued, I think the most important matchup in the entire series, is the AD carry matchup. I think when you're looking at these two, Hope and JackeyLove have both been very, very important towards their team's success, and for different reasons. Hope has been exceptionally good for Anyone's Legend, and when you look at their victories over Top Esports, it's mostly because Hope has been so good against this team that they've been able to get over the hump, that he has been like a primary carry option for this team. But traditionally speaking, you wouldn't necessarily consider Hope on the same level as JackeyLove. If that's going to be the case going into this series, if Hope can't get going, if he's not going to be a big primary option like he has been, then I think JackeyLove is in a really good position to be able to, you know, take over and win a lot of these games, and I think that's going to be difficult for AL to be able to overcome. But if Hope is able to have the same kind of performances he has had recently against Top Esports, I think that's going to open up a ton of opportunities for AL, and that's going to put them in the dominant position. Now, Kale and Crisp are both, you know, kind of polar opposite supports. Kale, a little bit feast or famine, but definitely much more of the controlled chaos style, much more vision oriented, and he likes to make a lot of more secure plays, whereas Crisp, on any given day, can be the best support in the world or the worst support in the world, and you just kind of don't know which one you're going to get. I think this is definitely a matchup between, you know, 2 different stylistic bot lanes. In AL, you have the much more consistent, much lower ceiling but higher floor bot lane, and for Top Esports, you have the higher ceiling, lower floor bot lane. But generally speaking, that's kind of been thrown out the window. JackeyLove's floor has increased so much, and Hope's ceiling has increased so much that I think that matchup is the most interesting to look at. The other one that I think is underratedly very, very intriguing here that I think really will determine a lot about the series is top lane. Flandre versus 369. We talked about how both of them ended up gapping Ale on their way here, but they've been pivotal pieces towards why their teams have found success. Flandre has been maybe the best top laner in the LPL, and 369 is really the only one giving him a run for his money in terms of performances. So far in Winter, obviously Bin is up there, but both of these guys can beat Bin. Like, that is definitely the case. We both know they have the skill to. Flandre's been in better form, but how can you count out 369 in these big moments? I think that top lane matchup will matter a lot. And somehow we've talked about Tarzan versus Kanavi like fourth in terms of this matchup. I think both of them are good. That's why I'm talking about them a little bit later and it's going to be the same thing for Shanks and Cream. I'm just not worried that either of them is going to like shit the bed or be way better than the other. They can both be very aggressive. Tarzan is notoriously like the most aggressive early game jungler in the world, and Kanavi is like the best early game pather. We'll see how that ends up working out, but I think both of them are probably going to show up and be fine on the day. Same thing for Cream and Shanks. I just would be shocked if one of them came out and was like significantly better than the other. Obviously, that would tip the scale in favor of whichever player was way better than the opposite, but I think jungle mid is both very secure on the other side of on both sides of these matchups, and that's why I think the side lanes, top lane and bot lane, are really going to determine who ends up coming out on top. But as you can see from the bar in the middle, I'm definitely leaning more in favor of the red, more in favor of anyone's legend, at least a little bit, if only because they've already done it twice over the course of this year. I would be naive to completely ignore that fact, but on paper, I think these two teams match up very, very favorably. I think that there is a real shot that either can walk out as champions. I think for me right now, I'm picking AL 3-2. I think it's going to be the closest series that these two have played so far this year. But again, if Top Esports wins, I'm not going to be surprised at all. I was a big proponent of them getting here in the first place, and I'm not shocked to see them in finals at all. So I'm interested to see what happens. Obviously, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below, but this is going to be a banger basically no matter what. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL Winter Split Semifinals overview and analysis video. Only two teams remain. Anyone's Legend taking on Top Esports for the right to be crowned the LPL Winter Split champion and to represent the LPL at the First Stand tournament. I'm very excited to see how this goes. Obviously, AL has a bit of an advantage because of their victories in the recent, matchups that these two have had, but how can you count out a team like Top Esports? I'm very intrigued to see what ends up happening. Of course, let me know what you think down in the comment section below, but that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. And again, I want to reiterate, I will be live both here on YouTube and on Twitch at 4 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. PST tomorrow, or March 1st, whenever you end up watching this video, streaming the NACL OQs for Citadel Gaming. If you're interested in just hanging out, asking me questions about, the LPL or, any of the other pro leagues, or watching the games with me, then definitely swing by. I'd love to have you there in chat, but obviously we've got more content coming your way that isn't just live streams. We're going to be talking about the LPL finals. The LEC playoffs are really kicking into gear, and First Stand is right around the corner. We're going to be covering all of that on this channel, so stay tuned for that. And if you're interested, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all